Hello, I'm Shavana Anderson Bird, Site Director for the California Reading and Literature Project at UCLA, and this is Lunch Bites. Today on Lunch Bites, I'd like to have the conversation of moving towards critical literacy. Critical literacy is really something that we find in the entire world that we live in. It's a way for us to look at things. We've discussed multicultural text and social justice text and culturally responsive text. And today we put them all together with this idea of critical literacy, which is the lens that we need in order to actually dive deeper into any of these texts. So think of critical literacy as a lens for you to not only see the world, but a lens for you specifically to see your text. Critical literacy involves the reader being cognitive of what's going on in their mind as they're reading through metacognitive strategies and awareness. It permits the reader to be transformative in their thoughts, in their behaviors, in their being, and in their perspective of a text. Critical literacy is reflective. So during the reading of the text, the active critical reader will also reflect on what they're thinking, what they used to think, what they think now, and they're constantly questioning. So they're questioning the text, they're questioning the author, they're questioning the setting, they're questioning the words, the vocabulary that's being used. It's a very active process for reading. So that deeper dive into the text through critical literacy also promotes more meaningful discussions. When you understand the why behind something, it changes the way that you can think about it or that you discuss it. It requires an active participation. So there's no way in the world a reader can just sit back and simply enjoy the text. Critical literacy means that I'm actively thinking, well, why did they use this character? And why did they put this setting here? And this is really unrealistic because someone who speaks like this would never say these words. All of these things are going on in the critical literacy mind. And lastly, it empowers the reader. It gives the reader that equal footing with the author that I spoke about, but it also empowers the reader to say, I can question, I can challenge things in the world. And that's what we want our kids to be able to take away. Here's a book called The Help. If you haven't read it before, it's basically about a young woman, white journalist in the South during the Civil Rights Movement who writes the stories of some domestic workers. Well, this book allows me to do exactly what bullet number 1 says, which is, are there opportunities in my curriculum to explicitly model and teach critical reading? So at first glance, just enjoying this book, I might say it's a nice book and, oh, isn't this a wonderful book that these domestic workers got their stories out there? But when I take a deeper dive into the book and I read it through my critical lens, then I have questions. I have questions about this book has the savior complex of someone coming in and saving a particular community where they're not able to actually empower themselves and save themselves. This book also perpetuates many stereotypes. So the book only has a few images of positive men in the book, for example. This book totally ignores some of the abuse, the sexual abuse and harassment that domestic workers had to experience during this time in history as well. The language in the book is very artificial. So there's a lot of things in this book that are hard for me to accept when I look at it through a critical lens. And I would question those elements with my students to model critical literacy. So looking at the text that I choose to use in the classroom for my year, I want to think, where do I start with literacy instruction with my students, and how do I dive into questioning and critical literacy with my students? And I've used a more current book here. There are many books on the canon that I could have used. So take a moment and think about how you're using text. Oh, fuck, still. So I asked myself, looking at my text choices that I have for the year and what to teach, where do I start with my students? And though this is a relatively modern book, this can all be done again with books in the traditional canon as well. Another book that I enjoy using for critical reading would be To Kill a Mockingbird. So take a moment to think about thinking critically with the reading. We want students to know why they are reading. We want to allow opportunities for struggle for our student, struggle in the complexity of the meaning of the text to challenge their ideas and their beliefs. We want our students to understand that a good reader is a rereader, that as a proficient reader, I don't usually just read it once through. I read it again and I stop and I pause and I might come back to it a few days later because it's still playing in my mind. We want to make sure that they see that we want to be active with the text. It's not just something you lie in your bed and you fall asleep with and you can tell your teacher, yeah, I read 20 pages. We want to explain what the text says and what the text does. So there's always a says and a does when it comes to text. And we want to make sure our students understand that and that they're looking for that when they're reading critically. We want them to understand what influences the text, what things from the outside world or from the world of the author were brought into the text that influence what we're reading, but also what are we bringing in that influence what we read about the text. And then we want to make sure that our students understand that they need to know who they are as a reader, what they accept as a reader, what they challenge as a reader, what they actually want to even read. These are things that we could teach them through critical literacy. So currently in your classroom, have you introduced the idea of critical reading to your students? Are they aware of active reading? I believe this is something really important to hit home at the beginning of school year, especially for our older students, that critical reading is what's going to open the door to literacy for them in the future. And that's how we want to start reading from the very beginning. What opportunities do you have currently in your curriculum to explicitly model and teach critical reading? Really going to be a key issue right now, especially if you're teaching online. How do we communicate the importance of that with our students? But also thinking they're online all the time. So maybe critical literacy for them starts with some of social media posts and things. And then looking at your text choices, where do you actually start this instruction? And again, right now I would offer critical literacy, social media. There's so much out there that they could be reading and challenging right now that would get them to start understanding who they are and thinking about themselves and how it connects with the outside world. This has been Lunch Bites. Thank you for joining. I look forward to seeing you next time.